beneficial.
Yeah. It sounds like the analytical point of view, or the more, I would say, manly point of view, is just changing. And I would say for me, it sounds more feminine to say, how do I feel about what I'm doing? What are my goals? How do I relate to my eternal self? And how do I inspire others? For me, that's why I called it emotional or social work as a leader. And it's just my guess, and tell me, what do you think, that if they have more women in the leadership team, it will be easier for them, for the women and for the team? That's what I think. What do you think?
Absolutely. So yes, I mean, I think there's something around the fact that we realize now in 2021 that those of us who are working in leadership and who are leaders that are trying to grow and learn, that you don't check part of yourself at the door when you come into work or when you lead. And you're not really that different in the two places. There may be aspects that are, but actually to be an authentic leader is more inspirational. And so when we can realize who we are as a whole person, which means including the emotional side, because it affects how effective we are in our decision making. It affects how effective we are in our viewpoint. So I think now the idea that we need to bring that all is the new aspect, maybe newer. It's been around for a while, thanks to Daniel Goleman and company. But I think that, yes, and it's also proven that teams that have more women are more effective. And that does often come down to the fact that, like people, teams have an emotional intelligence. And so if women tend to be more emotionally intelligent, and I think that that's changing. I think a lot of men are growing that. I see it all the time. Those teams are more effective.
Yeah, it sounds right. And I think that it's always surprising to me that, like, most people, when they think about leaders, they think about the strategy, they think about the business, they think about the way that they are operating and telling other people what to do, and everyone is saying, yes, you're so right, we should do it. And but actually, when we're thinking about inspiring people and being a leader and not just a manager, it's something else, and it requires something different from you, and the way you see yourself is different, I think. And
Absolutely.
And it requires change in yourself, like in the way that you see yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think it requires a lot of change in how you see yourself and the assumptions that we all have on what we need to do as a leader. I've been a teacher for many years as well, and when you start teaching, you think you have to know everything and you have to have all the answers. And I think a lot of the leaders that I work with are similar. Well, I need to have the answers. I need to know the vision. I need to know the strategy. And so sometimes my job is to ask the question of, well, and what would happen if you didn't? And you asked, what would change? Right? So that requires people to look inwards and be confident with not always knowing or not having control.
Yeah. It's dealing with fear and vulnerability, the fact that you don't
Absolutely.
know. Yeah.
Vulnerability is a big one. Right? The leader needs to go first at being vulnerable. So
yeah. And then you allow your team to ask questions that they think, maybe I will sound stupid if I ask, maybe it's not a good thing to ask. Or if you're vulnerable and you're saying, I might not know everything, and other people could next to you say, you know what, I didn't understand it fully too. Right. So.
I see it all the time. And I've experienced it working on teams. I mean, being a part of a team, or, I've gone through that, and I have been there with the idea of, I don't want to ask that question. They're going to think I'm stupid. And what you realize is when you start asking the questions, you are rarely alone. And if you're alone, it's okay. Right. But that needs to be, that's the whole part of creating that culture, that it really does need to be okay if somebody doesn't understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. And when we're thinking about creating something new and innovative, you are in the unknown, you are in the uncertainties, you don't know, you really don't know. So
Right.
you need to be able to live in this unknown state longer than just a few minutes. You need to be acquainted to that sense of, I don't know, but it's okay. Like, you need to do both.
Comfort in the discomfort. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I think that most leaders and most people are trying to avoid these situations, and then you will never grow because you're staying in what you know really fully, and you're sure of yourself there, and then you just stay there.
And that's what we talk about. For example, my colleagues and in Unusual, we've had a lot of conversations around that idea. We've definitely talked about, is it okay to be uncomfortable, and how do we get people to be okay with all of that?
Yeah, it's hard.
To because that might be the biggest hurdle if they have the assumption that the leader needs to understand. But that goes two ways, because when you're in a culture where the leader does know, and you're used to being on a team where the leader is the one telling you, you also aren't used to taking the initiative. So the training needs to be full circle. It needs to be really with everybody. It's a team effort in that sense.
Yeah.
Because
It
people
reminds
need to learn to put themselves out there.
Sure. It reminds me of a funny story of an Israeli company. They built a system for electricity companies, so very, very big companies. And they tried, it's a security company for these kinds of organizations. And they went to a few countries and they did a drill. They tried to attack the system and see everyone is like, you could handle it with our system, and then you could just act upon and make everything fine. And they did it in a few countries, and they know how it's supposed to be done. And then they came to China, to the biggest company in China, something like that, I'm not sure. And then they told them, that's the system. Now we're going to attack you. The drill is starting. Let's go. And they're starting to attack them and being stronger and stronger. And it gets to a point that the facility is at risk. They could just close it down, and they don't do nothing. The team is not doing anything.
Really?
So they just stopped the drill in the middle, and they came into the room and they asked them, why didn't we're
Respond.
attacking you, and they don't respond to anything. And they said, but you didn't say who is calling the shots. Who is the one to do it?
Absolutely. So that goes back to the culture. That goes back to how culture can affect, in this case, the agility of a team to respond to the outside world. And, we use that term VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, change, and ambiguity. And that's the world we're living in. Everything is changing so quickly now. And so it's no longer a question of if you will have some sort of, whether it's an attack, I mean, that's a great metaphor, no matter what, whether it's an attack or a change or COVID, a world pandemic. It's really when and what will you do in the face of it? And that has brought up so many issues for teams, for companies that just couldn't adapt. And then just the growing pains of having to adapt and doing it, but having to really shift mindsets and protocols.
Yeah. It really makes sense